In this video, we will discuss advantages and functions within the Corporate Control Center. The Corporate Control Center is an overview of the respective SiteLink Web Edition program. It's very useful the more sites that you have. 2 sites is much more valuable than 1, 10 sites more than 2, and so on. For some facilities, when they start to get to 10 sites or more, I would say that this is a definite need for your company. The basic premise of the Corporate Control Center is that you can view and edit or modify more than one location from the same area. So, for example, if you had 5 sites, instead of having to load 5 different programs, you could go into the one Corporate Control Center and edit, for the example, the rental agreement for all 5 sites. You could view reports for all 5 sites, and that premise continues for multiple areas of the Corporate Control Center. For example, when you initially log into the Corporate Control Center, you will have your site setup section. If we went into forms, I could choose all of my 12 locations in this particular database. Click on next. You choose a reference site that you can edit, and you can clone that information for all of your facilities. For example, if I highlight location 1 and click on next, if I choose the lease and I edit the lease and save it, I'm saving the change that was just made to the lease for all 12 sites. The lease that I'm editing is from site 1. So whatever I have in site 1 and whatever I end up with having after making these changes will affect all 12 sites. That is very different than if I clicked clone. If I click clone, I'm taking all of the forms from site 1 and replacing the forms in all of my other 11 sites. So in one instance, we're changing one form for all 12 locations in this example. In the other, we are cloning or taking all of the site's information from the reference site into all of the other sites. So to do that again, I went into forms, chose all the locations. I could have chose 10 locations in this example and click next. And my reference site could have been site 5. So in this example, I would be taking the change from site 5 and putting it into all of the other sites, or cloning what's in site 5 to all of the sites. So it's very important to recognize what the reference site is, in this case location 5, that we're going to be editing or cloning from. You may use it to view. If I just wanted to view, let's say, my defaults, my program defaults from one of my locations, again, instead of having to open multiple locations site by site, I can go into one program defaults and choose that site and edit it from here. It's going to be a very similar premise or process from the other screens, but we'll continue with that. The unit management screen, these functions that you see here are within the actual site level of the program, but again, we can access multiple locations from here. So for example, unit types, we could choose all of our sites. Maybe we have a new unit type that we want to have for all locations. I could add climate control if that was not an option in my unit types and add it to all the other locations. Or again, I could view a site or sites from within this section. The bulletin board, from one area, you could push down bulletins to your respective sites. A bulletin meaning a message. So maybe you have a message that says, everyone, we need to perform this particular procedure going forward. I could add that bulletin from the Corporate Control Center and push that down to all of my locations so they could see that particular bulletin. So if my bulletin was new procedure and then the body of my message, if I click OK, now all of my 12 locations are going to have that bulletin in their respective SiteLink Web Edition programs. Same thing with reminders. I can select one site, multiple sites, all of my sites, and add a reminder for all of my locations. Bad debt write-off. Within each respective SiteLink Web Edition program, you can write off bad debt or credit off charges for people that have been moved out. But within here, I can go in site by site, and instead of having to go into one unit, I could write off all the bad debt for all of my sites. So sometimes we see the situation where a location may not be writing off bad debt as a process or as a rule, and then after a certain amount of time, let's say a year or a couple of years of using the SiteLink program, they realize that they have tens, if not hundreds of people that have been moved out in the past that have debt that needs to be cleared off. You're not expecting to receive that money. Well, you can come in here and pick and choose each person or select all and write off those charges to bad debt, which is a massive time saver compared to going in unit by unit within the SiteLink Web Edition program. Refund management, site by site, we can come in here and process refunds or dismiss refunds. We could do the same functionality within the site, but from within the corporate control center, again, we could choose one site, process refunds. So if we had a corporate entity or if we had one person that oversaw multiple sites, they could handle all of the refunds potentially from within the corporate control center. So if your checks, for example, are written from the corporate office, you could handle that from within this program as opposed to logging in site by site. SiteLink Price Optimizer, this is different ways to automate changing standard rates or changing rental rates. So the unit push rate optimization would allow you to set up a suggested rate on move-in. The tenant rate optimization gives you suggested increases in rental rates. Both of those options exist within the SiteLink Web Edition program, but again, you could access that from the Corporate Control Center. Unit price list using Excel and edit tenant rates using Excel. This only exists in the Corporate Control Center. If you want to apply formulas to how you would edit tenant rates or change standard rates, you can export your current rates, change it in Excel, and then import it again. A certain percentage of customers have their own set of formulas that they use, and this really helps with that process. E-file management. This lets you see for those leases that have been emailed using our e-sign program, it tells you if those documents are awaiting the manager's signature, awaiting the tenant's signature, or they're completed. This option exists in the Web Edition program, but like the other preceding screens, we have that option in the Corporate Control Center. Corporate users and rights. Just like within the Web Edition program, you will have logins for the corporate level. Oftentimes, managers don't have access to the Corporate Control Center. They can only access the site. But within the Corporate Control Center, the owner or area manager or however you define someone that should be able to oversee or view multiple locations, you would create them as a user with their own rights from within this section. So I could add someone, put in their username and password, and then determine, do they have access to all sites? Do they have access to only certain sites? Can they get into certain screens and not others? For example, you might have an accountant that can only view the reports from within the Corporate Control Center. You may have a structure in your company that you have area managers, and area manager 1 can look at site 1, 2, and 3. Area manager 2, they can look at site 4, 5, and 6. You can set that up from within the Corporate Control Center. SiteLink notifications. If we have a bulletin, a typical bulletin would be if we have an update coming out, that will show here in the screen. Daily ranking is a very useful tool. It's a one-stop shop where you can come in here and see different parameters, different metrics that define how your sites are performing compared to each other. We have consolidated summary for all your sites. Then we have activity and other categories that show, in this case, when do people log on? Maybe everyone's supposed to log in at 9 a.m. Well, one of your sites logged in at 11:38. We could see that very quickly here. How are your rentals doing? How are your sites matching up with each other? So in this demo, we don't have much data, but you could tell very quickly by looking at all these different categories how your facilities match up with each other. So relatively quickly you can see, well, site 4 seems to be doing really well. They're at the top of all the categories. Well, site 6, they're supposedly one of our better facilities, but they're lower in this respective category or multiple categories, and you can very quickly get an overall judgment of how your facilities are doing compared to each other. Google Maps. Google Map exists from within the site level, and it will place your facility and your tenants on a Google map. The advantage of using the Google map within the corporate control center is that you can show two sites on the same screen. So if you have two sites that are fairly close to each other, maybe they have overlapping tenants, you can see just how much of an overlap there is. And hopefully managers will work with each other. If they don't have a certain size available, maybe they can push some of those leads to the other location. This really hits home where everybody's coming from within one central area of the corporate control center. Reports, you can select one site, multiple sites, all of your sites, and view a report. So for example, if I wanted to bring up the management summary for two sites, I could do it here. Again, rather than logging in site by site, I could bring it up from one central area if this was a report that I focused on. One thing to realize is that the amount of time that it takes for one location to bring up the report, you're going to multiply that by the amount of sites that you have. So for example, if you have 10 sites chosen, it's going to take 10 times as long to bring up the management summary report. So in this case, we have two sites. There's site 1 and there's site 2, and down the line. We also have a consolidated section. If you want to see the total amount of money coming in, the total amount that was charged for all of your sites, you could run the consolidated management, and that premise flows through to all the consolidated reports. It certainly saves paper by viewing the consolidated section. Accounting export, you can certainly export from within the SiteLink Web Edition program, but if you want to export for all of your locations from one area, you could do that. So you could export your general journal entries for 12 sites in this particular case, and then one person can receive all those files rather than putting an expectation or a process in that the individual manager needs to send a file from each location. It can all be sent from one area. Promotions. Promotions are similar to discount plans, but you can do them from the corporate control center and have corporate promotions. So maybe you want to bundle discounts. Maybe you have 1 month half off plus you get a free lock. You can do that within the corporate promotions area. In the bottom left hand corner, we have tenant account section and lead to lease section. We are pushing that right now to our My Hub area. So depending on what time you're viewing this recording, this may not still be here, but you're going to use My Hub, which is myhub.sitelink.com, where you're going to look at your lead to lease and look up your tenants from one central area. One other area to highlight in our site setup, we have a section called Report Scheduler. If you want reports to be emailed to you, you can set that up here. You can create jobs by clicking on Add, and you put in what you want sent to you. Maybe you want the management summary sent. You choose which sites and then what time. Maybe I want this at 2 a.m. every day. I select which reports. I could choose management summary. Maybe I want to have the management history or any combination thereof. If I click run at midnight of previous day, it will make sure that even though I'm sending it at 2 a.m., it's capturing everything up to midnight the day before with this particular option. And then add or choose which person or people are going to receive those reports. So instead of having to log into the corporate and wait for 10 sites or 20 sites to come up, you can have those in your inbox at whatever specified date and time that you want to receive them. It's automatically sent from the SiteLink servers. You do not have to set up your own respective email to do this. And that is our corporate control center.